Mr. Dorkman, this is James Harper. I've received your letter and would like to have a chat with you about it. Give me a call when you get a chance. Thank you.
That's James Harper, one of the Cold War's most notorious nuclear spies, leaving me a voicemail. I'd written him a letter to see if he'd speak with me about his story. To be honest, I didn't have high hopes. Hell, I wasn't even positive that I had the right address. But to my surprise, Harper responded. And we got to talking. A lot.
Yeah, hi, Zach. This is Harper again. I thought I'd just call you back in case you had just stepped out. I called you a few minutes ago. Yeah, hi, Zach. It's almost 8 o'clock Saturday night here. I've been working. Yeah, hi, Zach. It's Friday night. Give me a call when you get a chance. Talk with you later. Bye-bye. It's Harper.
When we began our conversations in 2019, Harper was marooned in northwest Arkansas. He had vague plans of reuniting with an old flame who lived in the area. Things didn't work out with the ex-girlfriend, but Harper was an old man in poor health, so he stayed out there in Arkansas, a world away from his hometown of San Francisco.
It's Arkansas, 2,000 miles away from where I grew up, and I miss California, something fierce.
Harper and I spoke frequently for a while. He was a born charmer, chatty, backslapping, eager. It was easy to imagine him as a great salesman, or as a top-notch con artist. The first time we spoke, he said he had just sat down to begin writing his memoirs, and maybe we could collaborate. I was never able to tell if that was a con either. Despite myself, I liked him sometimes. He was a great storyteller. He was a kind of honest liar. He really did try his best to answer my questions, to recall tiny details about his espionage odyssey. And I was taken aback at just how precise his memory was, all those years later. But Harper could be revolting, too. And I'm not just talking about his spine. He was frequently misogynistic, casually bigoted, sometimes flippantly cruel. Harper often seemed unaware about how he might appear to others. Or he simply didn't care. When I first spoke to Harper, he said something that I've never been able to forget. He said, "When I commit to something, I do it fully and completely, even espionage." And then I remember him laughing.
If I needed some information, I'd call somebody and get it somehow.
I'm Zach Dorfman, from Project Brazen and PRX. This is Spy Valley. Episode 2, The Shadow of the Valley of Wealth. James Harper was born in 1933, the middle child of 3 boys. His father hailed from Arkansas. His mother grew up in a huge ranch house in the San Joaquin Valley in California. Harper was raised nearby, in Fresno. He and his brothers were all engineering savants of sorts. They were just born with a grasp of this stuff, particularly his older brother, Roland.
We all got into technical stuff one way or another. And my older brother, Roland was a real genius of the crew.
But Roland's facility with electronics got him into some trouble at a very young age. When he was 11, Roland started broadcasting a pirate radio station from the house.
And one night when my dad was sitting in the living room reading the paper, the FBI knocked on the door and says, "Hey, you know what's going on around here?" He says, your son's got a radio station that can talk to people all around the world. And the FBI made him take all that radio equipment out in a vacant lot near the house and bust it up. So put him off the air.
Wow.
If that was Roland's last run-in with the FBI, it certainly wouldn't be James's. Because of World War II, Harper's family moved around a lot. They eventually settled in Fairfield, California, on the fringes of the Bay Area. That's where Harper went to high school. He was a football jock and muscle car buff.
I consider Fairfield my hometown, and the city, San Francisco, my big hometown.
By the time graduation rolled around, Harper was eligible to get drafted into the Korean War. But combat ended by the time he got through boot camp. So instead of fighting in Korea, Harper spent his military service comfortably stationed in California, where he honed his engineering and electronics skills.
I was always kind of inclined towards complicated stuff like electronics and mechanics and sort of thing. But I got some real schooling at it.
Harper's life had a way of reflecting both the history of the Cold War and the evolution of Silicon Valley. Fresh out of military service, Harper got a job in the booming aerospace industry in Southern California, an industry that was inextricably tied to the Cold War and the threat of nuclear conflict. The company Harper worked for had lucrative Pentagon contracts, and it was designing America's nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles. Harper worked on rocket engines, but he didn't last there long.
They were experimenting with different solid rocket propellants, and they never knew exactly what was going to happen.
One day, Harper was almost decapitated by a fuel explosion at a rocket testing facility.
I says, the hell with this. I'm going back up to Northern California and find myself a nice quiet job in electronics.
But quiet wasn't really in James Harper's nature. His new job had him working on nuclear warning systems. Harper, an electronics savant, happened to be a native son of the region where this high-tech revolution was poised to explode at precisely the moment of its ignition.
The San Jose area has been transformed. We have gone from what the poets called the Valley of Heart's Delight to Silicon Valley.
I don't think there's any place in the world that has the capacity and the expertise that we have here in Silicon Valley for microprocessor chips.
This same basic chip can do everything from switching on a roast to guiding missiles.
Silicon Valley today has the capacity to supply the brain for electronic warfare systems.
By the mid-1960s, Harper was living the life of a young Silicon Valley comer. Around this time, he married his first wife, Colleen, and they soon started a family. He founded a small firm of his own, Harper Magnetics.
When I got my transformer company, Harper Magnetics, my main customer was Kaiser Aerospace and Electronics in Palo Alto. And guess who worked in the accounting department at Kaiser Aerospace and Electronics?
Louise Howell. She was a woman whose entanglement with Harper would define both of their lives. Howell was in her 20s when they met. She had green eyes, blonde hair. And Howell gravitated toward extremes. She drank heavily, then would exercise excessively. In high school, she and her drinking buddies would speed around in their cars, racing through the streets. Sometimes, she was the gregarious class clown, but she could also be sullen and withdrawn. Howell had moved to California from Mobile, Alabama. She went west with a close friend, dreaming of bigger and better things.
They left Mobile and came out to California to set the world on fire. And over a period of time, I got to know her that way, and then we dated for a while, and then...
Harper and Howell had an affair. But soon enough, Howell wanted to put some distance between herself and Harper. She got a new job and moved up to San Francisco. She married a man named Neil Schuler, taking his last name. In that time, Louise Schuler and James Harper fell out of touch. Meanwhile, Harper Magnetics went bankrupt, and so Harper went to work for Fairchild Semiconductor, the very firm that had helped invent the silicon-based microchip. Thus, the silicon in Silicon Valley.
At that time, that's when I was working for Fairchild. I worked for their microwave and optoelectronics division, and they were big in these LED light-emitting diode digits.
But Harper, like any good Silicon Valley entrepreneur, was already plotting his next move.
And I got to thinking, boy, they were using those little handheld calculators and stuff. Why doesn't somebody make a digital stopwatch?
That's right. James Harper, future nuclear spy for the Soviet Bloc, is the inventor of the digital stopwatch. In the early 1970s, Harper founded Harper Time and Electronics, selling his signature AccuSplit stopwatches. It could have been huge, the windfall that Harper had been chasing for years. But Harper's business partners said he embezzled tens of thousands of dollars for personal use, and he was unceremoniously booted from the firm.
Oh, man. Well, they threw me out of my own company. I was still operating it many years later and very successfully. Still with my AccuSplit digital stopwatch. I thought of that goddamn name.
We'll be back after the break. We're back. Harper's ejection from his namesake company caused something bleak and latent in him to bubble to the surface. He drank to excess. He gambled compulsively. He had affairs upon affairs. Harper was a kind of early model tech bro, a hard-partying, science-oriented jock, more than willing to move fast and break things. By the mid-1970s, Harper's appetites began to undo him, and the promise of a potentially brilliant career began to dim. It was around this time that Harper began circling the orbit of a man named Bill Hugel.
Hugel his name had come up.
Case on Hugel. He's such a lowlife, he's probably a spy.
With Hugel, what motivates him? Evil.
We zeroed in on Bill Hugel.
Hugel was a symbol of the promise of early Silicon Valley. He and his first wife were pioneers in the semiconductor industry. Here's FBI counterintelligence agent Don Ulrich.
It was the Wild West then. It was a burgeoning industry, Hugel just talked ad infinitum with everybody in Silicon Valley at that time about, getting venture capital.
Hugel was better connected than Harper. He co-founded a global semiconductor trade association. It's still thriving today. He even ran, albeit unsuccessfully, for Congress as a Democrat in Silicon Valley in 1972, earning some big-name endorsements along the way. Hugel was a proto-libertarian of sorts, a self-styled iconoclastic free thinker that Silicon Valley seems to continually produce. He was anti-war, pro-environment, and an evangelist for free trade, including with the Eastern Bloc. But Bill Hugel had a secret, because in addition to being an archetypal Valley entrepreneur, he was secretly working for the Polish intelligence services. The Poles gave Hugel the code name Eagle. Harper's life would change once they crossed paths. At first, Harper viewed Hugel as a kind of mentor.
There were two hangouts in Silicon Valley, two main hangouts in Silicon Valley at the time that all this took place. One of them was Cheyavon, and the other one was the Town Oak in Sunnyvale.
That's where Harper befriended Hugel and his then wife, Bevelyn Hugel. It all went down at the Town Oak.
One time in the Oak, he and Bevelyn were in there, and there was this kind of drunken guy was giving Bevelyn a bad time, and Bill didn't know what the hell to do about it. And so I saw what was going on. I grabbed that guy that was giving Bevelyn a bad time and threw him out that side door at the Oak. And Bill felt that he was forever grateful for me for taking that guy off of Bevelyn's back.
From then on, Harper and Hugel became quick allies. Hugel started using Harper as an enforcer of sorts. Harper even traveled to L.A. once to threaten someone on Hugel's behalf over a business deal.
He wanted me to go down to L.A. and point out to him that if they didn't square away and do what he wanted them to do, he was going to fuck them up real good. Anyway, so I went down there and I gave this guy that stuff, and they backed off on that deal. And Hugel thought I was forever useful in that capacity from then on. Evidently, I at that time, I looked a lot more formidable than I think I really was.
But Hugel was running bigger schemes, like helping ship prohibited technology to the Soviet Bloc. Hugel's Polish contacts would provide him shopping lists of prohibited high-tech they wanted. Then, Hugel would task two of his close buddies to secretly obtain that tech.
His two stooges, they had a shopping list from the Eastern Bloc. Exactly how they got it, I don't know. It might have been from Bill. But anyway, somebody put them on to me as a source of information for to fill items on that shopping list. So I got to working with them.
If Hugel was a witting agent of the Polish intelligence services, Harper was a sub-agent, someone to advance Hugel's illicit activities. The KGB would assemble these shopping lists and pass them to the Poles and their other Eastern Bloc allies. Moscow was using Warsaw, like Hugel was using Harper. Moscow wanted cutting-edge computer technology, but also clearly military items, like plans for a new tank-launched rocket. In theory, Harper's job was pretty simple: obtain things from the KGB shopping list and get paid for it, without dealing with the Poles themselves.
Basically, what I did was they'd say, well, we need a manufacturing process document. I had so many contacts there in the valley. I just take the lead from them about what they wanted, and I'd sit down at my dining room table with a phone and a pencil and paper and go to work. If I needed some information, I'd call somebody and get it somehow. And I'd put this document together, and they'd take it over to the Eastern Bloc and sell it to the Poles, and they would pay me for it.
For Harper, the work was easy enough. And while it was lucrative, he wasn't making a fortune from it. $2,500 here, $5,000 there. But Hugel, meanwhile, was operating on a much grander scale. He had connections all over the world. He'd use them to ship prohibited technology onward to Poland.
I knew that he had some contacts that they used to transfer that equipment into the Eastern Bloc.
By 1975, the FBI and Commerce Department also knew about Hugel's transshipment scheme. They opened up an investigation into his activities. Hugel was providing the Poles with enough technology for them to construct an entire computer factory. That way, they wouldn't need to rely on stealing these items piece by piece. But all was not rosy in Hugel's relationship with Warsaw. Here's FBI counterintelligence agent Don Ulrich.
It turned out it was never all that successful because by the time they got it up and running, it was, out of date. So I always like to say that Hugel screwed somebody else. He screwed the Poles as well as
that doesn't surprise
as
me.
Other folks.
Some of Hugel's dealings with the Poles were secret, but some were overt. At one point, one of Hugel's Polish government contacts tried to recoup over $500,000 from him, even suing Hugel in a U.S. court. That Polish official? None other than Zdzisław Cichodzin, the Polish intelligence officer we met earlier, the same Polish spy who would later be feted by the KGB for his role in obtaining Harper's nuclear docs. From that point on, Hugel was definitely on the FBI's radar. In San Francisco, they even gave his case a code name, Starfish. But for whatever reason, they couldn't nail him. If Hugel was a big shot in the Valley, Harper was a bit player at best, a failed entrepreneur who occasionally performed under-the-table work for Hugel and his stooges. One night at Chez Yvonne, the notorious Silicon Valley watering hole, would change all that.
And then one night in April, I'm at the Chez, bending my elbows with my cronies and having a drink.
And that's when he saw her, his old girlfriend, Louise. 13 years had passed since they were an item.
And Louise came in and sat at the other end of the bar.
Harper tried to play it cool. After all, Louise hadn't seemed interested in keeping up their affair all those years ago.
And I gave her a casual wave, and she did too. And I just kind of left it at that. I had tried to date her several times, and she turned me down. So I just figured, well, here's a meeting that where two people know each other, and that's it. They say hi, and go their own way.
But tonight was going to be different.
I was standing there at the other end of the bar, drinking, and Louise tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, mister, can I buy you a drink?" And I said, "Yeah, you can buy me a drink." And I said, "If you play your cards right, you can spend the night with me."
A lot had changed since Louise Schuler and James Harper were last together. Schuler had been married and divorced. Harper had separated from his wife. And Schuler had a new job, working for a tech company and military contractor called Systems Control Incorporated. Systems Control was an archetypal Bay Area tech firm. It did highly classified research for the U.S. military on ballistic missile defense. In particular, on how to shoot down nuclear-armed Soviet missiles that could be launched at the U.S. The company's work was part of what the spy novelist Jean Le Carré once called the higher mathematics of the balance of terror. Schuler had landed a plum job as the assistant to Robert Larson, the president of the firm. For a decade, she had also been his mistress.
They had a mistress relationship going for 10 years when on that night at the bar, she came up and offered to buy me a drink. And
Harper and Schuler fell in quickly with one another, and they eventually moved in together. But their relationship soon took on a whole different, darker dimension.
Then Louise starts telling me what she's doing, and I'm thinking, my God, I find out that what she's got is related in large part to ballistic missile defense. And I said, Jesus Christ, she's working right in the middle of a berry patch for me. I got to think, well, I'll find out what the hell she's got over there, and I gave her some guidelines on what to look for. So she starts bringing me stuff right and left. And I'm looking at it and kind of sorting it out, and one thing and another. I said, Jesus Christ, I bet you I can sell this to the Eastern Bloc through Hugel.
Harper knew that Bill Hugel was already involved in illicit trade with the Soviet Bloc. And he knew that there was nothing more valuable in Cold War spying than information on nuclear weapons. And he wanted to make a deal. And that's how James Harper, native son of California, Marine Corps veteran, engineer and alumni of some of Silicon Valley's most storied firms, inventor of the world's first digital stopwatch, embezzler and thief, boozer and cheat, embarked on becoming one of the most notorious U.S. nuclear spies of the entire Cold War. Next episode on Spy Valley, Harper goes to Europe and makes a deal with the Soviet Bloc. Spy Valley is a production of Project Brazen in partnership with PRX. It's hosted, written, and reported by me, Zach Dorfman. Bradley Hope and Tom Wright are the executive producers. The show is produced by Goat Rodeo. To find more of Goat Rodeo's work, go to goatrodeo.dc.com. The lead producer is Jay Venables. Story editing from Siddhartha Mahanta, Jay Venables, and Max Johnston. Executive producers at Goat Rodeo are Megan Nadolski and Ian Enright. Creative producers at Goat Rodeo are Max Johnston, Rebecca Seidel, and Ian Enright. At Project Brazen, Lucy Woods is the producer. Georgia G. is lead researcher. Mariangel Gonzalez is our project manager, and Megan Dean is programming manager. Ryan Ho is the creative director. Cover art designed by Julien Pradier. Mixing and engineering by Rebecca Seidel. Music from Goat Rodeo and Blue Dot Sessions. Editorial and production assistance at Goat Rodeo from Isabel Kirby McGowan, Kara Schillen, Jay Venables, and Megan Nadolski. Polish translation and narration by Hannah Kozlowska. Narration recorded at Outpost Studios in San Francisco. Continue to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on new episodes. And subscribe to Brazen Plus on Apple Podcasts for exclusive reporting and bonus material.